going to take a look specifically here at the Brooklyn Nets because I think that's probably the one team I've probably focused on these last few days in particular. Now that they don't have Kevin Durant available, and obviously he will be out for a couple of weeks still, maybe even a little bit longer than that. So things are certainly going to, I think, trend in the wrong direction for Brooklyn personally. We're only 2 games into the tenure, so I know it's a small sample size. Things can obviously change dramatically between now and when he does return in terms of their production and their style of play. But, this team has shown how stagnant I think the offense can get these last couple of games, sorry, especially in the fourth quarter. They don't have that sort of shot maker to rely on outside of Kyrie Irving. And it becomes very easy for defenses in the NBA to be able to just own in on one individual player if he's the only one that's sort of capable of creating his own shot. And I mean, we look at some of the metrics for the Nets. Let's start with having a look at what Kevin Durant brings to the table. So, I mean, plus 12.2 points per 100 possessions better when he's on the floor. That ranks in the 98th percentile in the league for individual impact at that end of the floor. They're 5.1% better with effective field goal shooting when he's on the floor. So we're talking a huge, huge chunk of their offense. And when you look specifically, I think, at what their offense does, they're first in the NBA in terms of shot making. And I think that is something that's going to speak volumes as to how unsustainable their current offense is without him. If you're ranking in the top sort of 2 or 3 in shot making in the league, it means you have elite shot creators that can create for themselves, that can make tough shots. That aren't necessarily high quality looks. And obviously Kevin Durant probably does that as well as anyone in the league. And if you remove that, I sort of spoke about this on the BetUS show earlier today as well, where you take that away and it makes life really difficult for those role players, specifically on the perimeter, to still be able to contribute in the same way as what they were doing when he's on the floor. The space isn't the same. The looks aren't going to be the same. The wide open shots are not going to be the same. That's for certain. So there's a lot of pressure now, obviously, on the shoulders of Kyrie Irving in particular, to be able to not just create for himself, but to manage the offense. And that, I think, is where it might come undone for them a little bit. I don't know if he has that level of management in him on the floor. I obviously have questions about his leadership as well on the floor. As a Boston fan, I can tell you he's not that guy. He's not the guy that can lead you out there, especially through adversity or if things get tough. That's where it gets really tricky for them. So coming off of 2 home losses, heading out for a 5-game road trip, Kyrie being the guy that you're going to lean on, I don't know if that's necessarily what you want. You need him to obviously be in complete alignment with Jacques Vaughn. We know that KD is. Whether Kyrie Irving is, I don't know, because he's going to have to now perform at both ends of the floor. And obviously what Durant was doing defensively as well is what, for me, had him very much in the MVP conversation before he went down. So looking at the last 2 games specifically for the Nets, 105.4 points per 100 possession against Boston, 103 points per 100 possessions, against OKC. Both of those really poor. We're talking 22nd percentile, 16th percentile in the league, those sort of splits and numbers. Both games sub 50% effective field goal percentage. That's really bad as well. And, again, the concern for me is, are these half-court possessions going to just end in one-and-done situations? Brooklyn has not been a good offensive rebounding team. If they're not creating those extra opportunities, they're not a team that forces a lot of turnovers defensively either. They're sort of bottom half in the league in that regard. So if they're going to find themselves in situations where they're going to continue to play half-court basketball, I think it's going to come a time where they just get really, really bogged down. And even today against the Spurs team that we know isn't particularly great defensively, San Antonio can do enough to secure rebounds. They're very good at that end of the floor in terms of limiting those second chance opportunities and creating second chance opportunities for themselves. So any team that has more possessions than them, I think, is already at an immediate advantage to Brooklyn. So I do have concerns for them going forward. That's sort of the one team I think we really can get ahead of the marketplace in this next week, where the adjustment probably isn't enough. Looking at the line today, this opened at San Antonio +6. I don't think they valued Kevin Durant properly into that line. You look at the Bucks line yesterday against the Pacers as a perfect example, where that opened at 11, that closed at 5. We're talking 5.5 points roughly of line value for someone like Giannis. I think Durant has to be in that ballpark, and I understand why it might not be the case, but I think if you really dive into sort of the impact he has on the floor for them at both ends of the floor, we're talking a plus 11-point differential per 100 possessions when he's on the floor for Brooklyn. It needs to be in and around that number. There is no way that the Nets would have been laying 11 and a half points on the road at San Antonio if Durant was in. That's just far, far too many points. So I think that there's a good opportunity these next couple of weeks for us to get ahead of the market here in terms of fading Brooklyn and taking a lot of unders, I think, in their games, because I do think that they still are able to perform at a respectable enough level defensively. That's going to obviously be the impetus as well. If you listen to some of Jock Vaughn's post-game interviews, he's sort of spoken about the need to really ensure that they're doing their part defensively, limiting those extra possessions, crashing the boards. The hustle effort, as he liked to describe it, needs to be A+ every single night. But offensively, it doesn't matter. I don't think how effectively they perform. They're still going to be heavily flawed, and teams are going to be able to slow them down pretty dramatically. So unders and fading Brooklyn these next couple of weeks, probably the two biggest takeaways I've got for my homework review on the Brooklyn Nets going forward. So hopefully that can transpire starting today as well, where we can keep fading them and being profitable in that regard.